All right, welcome back. We are now going to talk about the fundamentals of security. So, this is section 2 of the book of Mastering Security, and what we're going to talk about is the very basics, the foundational principles and concepts on how organizations can protect their data, their systems, their networks from any types of threats out there. We'll talk about how security is such an essential in ensuring confidentiality, integrity, and availability of our information. And this is referred to the CIA triad. So we'll talk a bit about what the CIA triad really means and why it is such a foundational principle in our world. Because we need to help prevent things from unauthorized access. We need to ensure that the data is accurate and trustworthy. And we need to make sure that, hey, the data that is there is available to the authorized users when is needed. Because we've got to remember, cyber threats are constantly evolving, and we do need to understand and how to implement different security fundamentals because it's going to be critical for organizations and individuals both. So cybersecurity is not just about deploying the latest technologies, but definitely adopting more of a holistic approach. And what a holistic approach is again not one size fits all kind of approach. So we do need to understand what compliance and what kind of regulations we have so we can create a security of well culture. So let's dig into what security of fundamentals really means. So information security roles. Let's talk a little bit about it. So there are a couple of different security roles that we do need to think about. There's always going to be the big boys, is what I like to call them. These are the chief security officers, the chief information security officer. CISO is what you normally refer to them as. We're going to have managerial security roles. So maybe your manager who's in charge of the security operations center. We might have some technical officers. Now, these are normally only in the very large organizations. Like you might have a CIO or a ISSO. A CIO is normally in charge of the information. They're a chief information officer for a reason. We're going to have some non-technical security roles. And these security roles could just be people that are going to be an auditor, just making sure that compliance is being met. And then we need to make sure that we're doing due care, which means we're trying the best of the best that we can, because due care and due diligence are two of the biggest concepts when it comes into cybersecurity. And we need to understand that due care is being adhered to, that the people around us are definitely doing the best of their ability to protect the data that's at hand, or to protect the asset at hand, whatever it may be, because we are going to be liable for it in the end. And so we need to ensure that we're doing a good job there. Some of the business units that you'll find out there are going to be like the Security Operations Center. Many of you who are going to get into cybersecurity at the beginning may work for one of these. You'll find a lot of IT analysts within the Security Operations Center, and there's many different levels of the SOC. The SOC can definitely start you off with just looking at logs all the way up. So just like in IT where you normally start at a help desk, the SOC is definitely a place that many people start in cybersecurity. The DevSecOps groups also are growing every day, because as we're building all this code, we do need to ensure that all the code and programming that we're building out there is definitely secure. Incident response teams, while smaller, do exist, and depending on if you work for a managed service provider or a managed security provider, these are out there. You'll be working either for a CERT or a CSIRT, incident response team, basically, whenever a department or a client does get attacked. So let's talk a little bit about some key differences here. So we need to understand that threats and vulnerabilities are definitely crucial to protecting our systems and data. So what is a threat? Well, a threat refers to any potential danger that could exploit a vulnerability to cause harm. Well, it's kind of funny because we used vulnerability within our definition here. So what's a vulnerability? Well, vulnerability is a weakness that can be exploited by a threat. So they kind of go hand in hand. So a threat attacks vulnerabilities, and vulnerabilities are attacked by threats. There are different ways of looking at this, so we just need to make sure what we go through each one of these. So remember, A threat has anything that has a potential to do harm to an organization's systems, network, or data. Threats comes from so many different sources. They can come from cyber criminals, malicious insiders, natural disasters. Hey, a hurricane or a tornado can come through, or even human error. Even if there's not intent, it can still be accidental or even environmental. So these threats are definitely there. So there are a lot of different types of threats. So we talked a little bit about a couple different examples. So you've got malware. So like for instance, ransomware attack can encrypt a company's files, and then now they're inaccessible until the ransom is either paid or we figure out how to recover from it. We can use phishing attacks, which is a social engineering attack, which we'll talk more about when we get to the social engineering section of this course. But it allows attackers to trick users into revealing sensitive information like usernames or passwords, credit card details, and normally they're pretending to be the real deal, right? You can have an insider threat. And insider threats normally pose as an individual with an organization. They can either be disgruntled employees or even employees who unintentionally compromise security by writing down their password or whatever it may be. There's a whole bunch of different ways an insider threat can happen. And then everyone's heard of probably a denial of service attack, but denial of service attacks can be where like a malicious actor floods a company's website with traffic, which overloads the server, which causes the company's website to crash. That's a good way of talking about a DOS, and we can talk about the different types of DOSs, including the distributed denial of services. So when we're talking about vulnerabilities, on the other hand, we can have a whole bunch of different other ways of doing it. Vulnerabilities can come from unpatched software, which makes the vulnerability weak, which means it allows them a knowing exploit for a threat actor to come in and come into your system. It could be maybe just some legacy hardware laying around, or human error where we talk about incorrect firewall rules. So there are definitely ways that we can protect different things here. But just be aware that threats exploit vulnerabilities to compromise security. That is the greatest way of putting it right there. Threats exploit vulnerabilities to compromise security. Understanding both is definitely going to be key, especially when we get to risk management. So let's talk about the CIA triad a little bit, because threats and vulnerabilities are central concepts in cybersecurity. Definitely know that now, right? Threats and vulnerabilities. But the threats are the potential dangers, while the vulnerabilities are the potential weaknesses. So how do we provide information to our end users? Well, we like to use what's called the CIA triad. C stands for confidentiality, I for integrity, A for availability, CIA. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to play a balancing game here. So confidentiality refers to the protection of information from unauthorized access. It makes sure that only the people who are supposed to have access to the data can see it or use it. Okay? So confidentiality is very important because, let's say, like social security numbers or product design. Maybe you're a company that makes a bicycle and you're ahead of your industry, but if for some reason your product design came out, maybe that will give competitors an upper edge. So we have to make sure that confidentiality breaches just don't happen. Now, we've got integrity. So in integrity, we now need to understand that the data that we have is accurate, reliable, and has not been tampered with. That's really the big key of integrity here. If I get a set of data, or I get an envelope or a bill from my power company, how do I know that that bill was not tampered with before I opened the envelope? How do I know that somebody did not modify that bill before I got the bill? Well, that's integrity. Integrity allows us to ensure that it has not been tampered with. And it's a very important piece of the CIA triad, because not only do we need to ensure that the data is confidential and only the people who need access to the data is known, but that the data itself hasn't been tampered with by an unknown entity. Finally, we get to availability. Availability is our last pillar of our CIA triad. And what availability means is that we're ensuring that the data and resources are accessible by authorized users when they need them. So, have you ever installed something on your PC and it slowed your PC down so bad that it was unusable? Well, that would have been where you've affected your own availability. No longer is your PC usable. While it's still confidential and no one's in the machine has now come to a stop because it doesn't have enough resources to complete your task. So, one of the big reasons for the CIA triad is we need these core elements to ensure that everything is coming up safe and secure and they're available for the end users, right? But what about non-repudiation? Non-repudiation goes hand in hand with the CIA triad, and what non-repudiation means is once a party has sent the message, maybe performed an action or initiated a transaction, let's say you were at Target and you swiped your credit card, can you deny that you did it later? Non-repudiation means that you cannot deny from doing it. It's about providing proof. It's about providing proof that something happened and that we're going to hold people accountable for their actions. So think of it as a receipt of a transaction. If you buy something online, both of you and the seller get a receipt that proves the purchase happened. In cybersecurity, non-repudiation ensures that similar proof exists for digital communications or actions. And there's many ways that we do this, between log information and making sure that things are encrypted and everything. But just know that non-repudiation means a subject cannot deny creating or modifying data. Okay? As we move through this. So we talked a little bit about confidentiality. Make sure that confidentiality is the protection of information from unauthorized access and ensures that only authorized users can use the data. For instance, think of it like a diary with a lock. It maintains a personal level of privacy maintains personal privacy for personal, financial, and business information. It's basically saying those who should have access do have access. As we move on to integrity exactly that is make sure that the data remains accurate and consistent and that no one has tampered with the data. Now, there are a couple of different ways that we protect things like hashing and key sums and digital signatures, which we'll learn about in the encryption class. But just know that integrity just prevents people from altering things that they say that they shouldn't be altering, right? If I sent you an email, are you sure it came from me and didn't come from somebody else? Then we have availability. Availability ensures that the system itself are accessible when they are needed by the authorized users. And be aware that we do keep saying authorized users because we don't care about the unauthorized users. We only want the system to be available for the people who need it to be available. Okay? And there's ways that we do that with uptime, redundancy, fault tolerance, and just ensure that we don't take down things because cybersecurity is kind of like a double-edged sword. We can lock things down where it's confidential and we can make sure that integrity is there for data, but what happens if the users can't access the data? What's the point? So all of our work is for naught. And then lastly, we've got our non-repudiation. Ensures a party cannot deny authenticity of their signature or on a document or a message being sent. It's basically just undeniable proof. If they said, no, I didn't do that, but you have proof that they did it, it's an easy way of just ensuring that we can point to what happened with our network and ensure who did it. All right. Now let's talk about authentication. So we talked about CIA, we talked about non-repudiation. Now we've got our AAA. One of them is authentication. Authentication is all about the process of proving of who you are. Okay? So a lot of times we use this with something that we know. Most of the time it's our username and password. That's how we log into a system. But there are multiple ways of doing authentication. And here's the types of authentication that you should have memorized. Authentication could be something you know, something you have, something you are, and sometimes they say MFA, which just means one or more of what's here. So a lot of times what we've been doing is we use multi-factor authentication with our systems now, because we'll log in with our username, we'll type our password. Well, we need something we have, like a security token. Maybe it texts me a code to my phone. Well, the only way that I could get that code is if I have the physical phone. So it could be smart cards, security tokens, mobile devices, a whole bunch of different things. If we get into biometrics, like fingerprints, facial recognitions, iris scans for something really expensive, then that's all about something you are. So MFA is combining two or more of these. Something you know, something you have, something you are. And normally you want to pick at least one from each category, and the more that you do that, the more secure it gets. Okay? Authentication is all talking about verifying the identity of a user. Again, it's that non-repudiation. How do I know that you're the one who logged into the system? Well, we used MFA. It's your username, password, and your code. It is definitely you. Our next A is authorization. And here's where a lot of people get a little bit confused. So authorization is the process of granting or denying access to specific resources or actions based on the user's identity. Once the user is authenticated, proven to say who they say they are, then the system will check the permissions and rights that they are allowed to perform. So authorization is just double checking to say who you are, and authorization is what can you do. Okay, and that's the best way to describe it. Who you are? I'm John. What can I do? Nothing. My wife says I can't do nothing, right? And so these are the different things as we're working through the systems. And then our last A is accounting. So accounting goes hand in hand with non-repudiation. Non-repudiation means I can't deny it, while accounting allows us to log and track users based on activities within the system. So it records and reviews users' activities is the best way to put it. It ensures that all actions performed on a system are tracked and can be tracked back to the user who performed them. So this is a way that we can make sure that we have non-repudiation with our system. And there are different ways that we do this. We do it with audit logs. We do different things with HIPAA or different regulatory compliance. We just need to make sure that as we're going through it, that we can either follow the proper procedures or have a log of what actually happened within our system. So here's what the cybersecurity framework looks like. Now, it doesn't get spoken about too much at all, really, but we do need to understand that it exists. So cybersecurity framework, or the CSF, is what you see at it in the industry, is exactly this. We've got an internal threats in our internal box, right? We need to be able to identify who we are working with. We need to protect the data that we have, and then we need to be able to say, hey, if there is an attacker, can we detect on it? Can we identify what they're doing, what data they're trying to head for, and how do we respond to that data? Maybe we are able to block the attacker before they do too much damage, and how much do we recover from that as well? So recovering could be restoring from backup. Could be a lot of different ways of doing this. And then what kind of other defenses do we have on our perimeter to also help prevent external threats from coming from the outside world? So this is the CSF. So as we keep going, let's talk about the security control categories. There are 3 different categories that you need to understand. We're going to have technical, which is tools and technologies used to enforce security. We're going to have operational, or otherwise known as administrative controls, which depend on a person for implementation. And then we're going to have managerial, which gives oversight to the system. Okay? So there are multiple ways to look at this. If we look at the managerial, this could be trying trying to think of the best way to put this. This could be policies and procedures. This could say, hey, this is what you should and should not do within our network. Operational controls could be, they could probably depend on a person. Like, for instance, you can't create new user accounts without going through the proper channels or through the proper IT department. While technical controls could be virus protection software, firewalls, different things that are implemented within our environment itself. So as we keep moving through this, we've also got security control types. And the security control types that we're going to be really focusing on are preventive, detective, and corrective. So whenever you put in a security control, it's probably going to be one of these. Preventive measures help prevent it before it even happens, before the attack even happens. For instance, maybe we air gap the machine, which means the machine's not even plugged into the network. We're trying to prevent it before it even happens. Maybe we monitor access, but we don't actually prevent anything. That's detective. And then corrective fixes anything after it occurs. Let's say it's monitoring for file changes, and once it detects that the file changes, it changes it back. Okay. Now, there are some other types of functional control types, such as physical, compensating, and deterrent, which I can talk a little bit about each one of these. So physical controls could be like door access controls or fencing. They could be the security guards, the CCTV, like surveillance cameras, badges or access control at all. So physical controls normally come with a physical barrier. We also can talk a little bit about deterrence. Maybe the security guard can be a deterrent as well as a physical control, because it actually, they're blocking you from even entering the building to begin with. Or have you ever logged into a system where it says, hey, only authorized access to these systems. If you're not one of the authorized access, persecution could happen. Well, that's a deterrent. Okay, security signs are deterrents, saying, hey, if you do something, this is what's going to happen. That makes sense? Okay. All right. Other types of deterrent could be just anything that discourages attackers from attempting compromise. So it could be warning signs, security guards, like we said. It could be legal notices. Heck, even a security camera can also be a deterrent. Now, compensating controls are the other alternative that we can put in place for a primary security control. And they basically are allowing us to add additional controls on top of our preventative, our detective, or our corrective actions, like MFA. MFA is compensating because using the password was not enough, so we added a secondary authentication step to make sure that you're authorized for our systems. Maybe we add an extra segment to our network. We use extra network segmentation. There are a whole bunch of different ways that we can add compensating controls. And the way I look at this one too is a lot of times compensating is security in depth. Not only one control is there, but you normally have more than one. Okay. So what do they look like? Physical are things like alarms, gateways, locks. Deterrents don't have to be physical, but they could be there, like signs or anything. And then compensating is normally a substitute for a primary control. In other words, it's more than one. So what is gap analysis? So gap analysis is a critical process that help organizations identify weaknesses in their security posture. What this means is, hey, what vulnerabilities are within our network and how do we determine that they exist? So as we're going through a gap analysis, what we're trying to do is we're trying to figure out what's currently there, where do we want to go, how do we identify what weaknesses that are there, and how do we fix them? Okay, so if you ever get asked what a gap analysis is, think of it like gaps within our security infrastructure. What holes are there and how do we fill them? That is how you do a gap analysis. And we're coming to the end on this one, but we've got zero trust. Zero trust is the new security model. It used to be that we would say trust but verify. No longer are we trust but verify. Now we are going the opposite. We don't trust anybody unless we verify you first. Okay, and that is what a zero trust model is. So it makes sure that no device, no user, no matter who you are allowed within our network until we have verified who you are. And this is different because it used to be, as I said, it used to be the opposite. We would just trust you until we didn't. So our core principle that we're looking here is we're going to verify everything. We want to make sure that we only grant you privileges that you need to do your job. So at the beginning, we might give you no privilege because we don't trust you. And then always assume that there's a breach. What this means is we're going to monitor as much as we can to validate that the traffic and everything within our network is actually proper traffic. Now, there are a couple different pieces of this. There's always the Identity and Access Management System, otherwise known as IAM. This helps us identify the proper user is within our system, and they have the proper privileges that they need, which is role-based access control. We need to make sure that the resources that they can touch are very, very small. In other words, they only get the resources that they need and nothing more. And then finally, we're going to add some MFA in here because we're very paranoid and we're not going to trust anything or anyone. So for our authorization and authentication, we want to make sure that we give as little information as possible. So that section is for the fundamentals. Make sure that you go through Canvas itself. Go look to see what else we need to do. We do have an engagement assignment for this one. And just be aware, starting after next class, I think class 3 is the one that we're going to start it on. We're going to start doing hands-on labs. Okay, so starting with hands-on labs, we'll get further into it. So here we go. I'll see you for the next class, which is, let's look up, see what the next class topic is. Looks like we're going to be talking about threat actors and physical security. Each one of those should be a video, and we'll talk further into it in class. See you then.